Good afternoon, everyone. So today I have a presentation for you. The purpose of this presentation is to bring out the supernatural powers that are really not spoken about in in the Bible that we have nowadays. So these stories I've taken from different books. This one we're going to start off is the story of Abraham, which of course we know him as Abraham, and I'm gonna call him Abraham because that's how basically I know him. And he, this story I took it from the book of Jasher, and the reason why is because it's so important. When I read Abraham's story in the Bible, it left me with so many different questions. So and another thing is that I have issue that a lot of the stories that they did leave out of the Bible in itself is stories that show the supernatural power and how our glorious Father in heaven functions, or things about heaven and you know, things that I've been curious about all my life. So I will start a series. This is the first one, and of course we're going to bring the patriarch as the first one. And so here we go. Abraham was born at a time when Nimrod was the king. When he was born, all the conjurers of the king were celebrating with Terah. Terah is Abraham's father, the birth of his son. As they were departing, they looked at the sky and saw one very large star that came from the east and ran in the heavens, that swallowed up four other stars from the four sides of the heavens. The sages understood this matter. They said, "It only betokens the child that has been born to Terah, who will grow up and be prolific, reproduce, and possess all the earth. He and his descendants will kill great kings and inherit their lands." They stated that the next day they would have to tell the king of what they saw. The next day the wise men had discussed the matter. They went to the king to advise him of what they saw the night before. So the king called Terah and tells him to give him the child so he may kill him, and he will pay him any amount of gold and silver to fill his home. The king had given Terah a beautiful horse, and Terah told the king, "I will respond to you if you tell me what I should do in this situation. My friend requested me to sell him the horse that you gave me." The king was so offended with and told him that horse is priceless, is one of the best horses on the earth. Terah responded, "Well, that's how I feel about my child." Nimrod then understood what he was trying to say. Terah, try, Terah tried to stay humble and told him, "You could do what you want with my entire family, but give me 3 days so I could decide." The king gave the 3 days to Terah. On the third day, the king sent to get Terah. Terah was so nervous. Terah also worked for the king in a high rank. That's why he was given the gray horse. Anyway, Terah went and took a child from one of his servants and took it to Nimrod. Now, Nimrod was known for being one of the most evilest men ever, and he took the baby and smashed the head of the baby as hard as he could. It was a horrible story. Terah then went home and sent his wife and his child to live in a cave, and he was hidden from everyone because his fame was throughout the entire city. Everyone knew of his existence. When Terah was 10 years old, he was then sent to his uncle's house, the house of Noah. Abraham knew God since the age of 3 years old, and he followed in his ways of God. Then Noah and Shem taught him the ways of God, because in those days no one followed God, only Noah and Shem. When Abraham was growing up, he was always questioning everything, the stars, the moon, the sky, figuring out what was God, how has he functioned. Noah and Shem were able to speak of the flood and the ark, the wickedness that was in the world, and why God punished the world with the flood. But that wasn't enough for Abraham. He sought God in everything and everywhere. No one followed God in those days, only the house of Noah. At the age of 39, he was sent to live with his father Terah. Now Terah works for the king and as his side gig he made idols out of wood and stone. And of course he sold them and worshipped them. This frustrated Abraham because he found it was very disrespectful to the one and only true God. One day Terah gave Abraham 3 idols to go sell for him by the side of the road. That sounded horrible to Abraham, but he did it, and basically one was burned and he broke one. The last one was sold to a traveler that gave him triple what was worth to help him out of the jam. Then he tested these idols with his father and gave them something to eat and asked Terah to watch to see if the idols ate the food. To make a long story short, this created an argument, and Abraham became furious and took a staff and destroyed all his idols. Terah, dismayed, ran to the king. The king heard the story and put Abraham in jail for 10 days. Within that time, they had decided that the punishment will be in to put Abraham in the furnace for 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights. The king set to get Abraham and announced his punishment. When the conjurers saw Abraham, the wise men, they said, well, this was the man that was supposed to be put to death 50 years ago. Hearing this, Nimrod became furious and called on Terah to explain. Terah lied and said his oldest son made him do it. His eldest son was 32 years old at the time of Abraham's birth. So the king determined that both Abraham and Haran, the eldest son, were going to get the same punishment. Abraham and Haran were then prepared to be put in the furnace. They were bound and gagged. Abraham and Haran stripped their clothes except for the bottom coverings and threw them both into the furnace. Haran already had feeling in his heart and thoughts in his mind to follow Abraham, but he never put effort in walking in the ways of Abraham. Unfortunately, Haran was burnt to ashes, but Abraham walked in the furnace for 3 days and 3 nights and was never burned. The cords they bound him with burned, but not even his bottom covering was damaged. At the end of the 3 days, the servants and all the king's men were talking about how he was walking in the furnace and went to tell the king. The king went down to the furnace and ordered his servants to take him out. 8 men died and several men's faces burned, and they could not take him out. Finally, the king called Abraham out. The king said to Abraham, come out, Abraham, come out of the furnace. And Abraham came out, and his cords of the bonds were burnt off, but his bottom loincloth was not burned. The king said to Abraham, how is it that you were not burned in the fire? Abraham responded, the God of heaven and earth, in whom I trust and who has all in his power, he delivered me from the fire into which you did cast me. Haran was burned to ashes. He was not saved because his heart was not right with God. Everyone who saw this came to bow down to Abraham, and Abraham said, do not bow down to me, but bow down to the God of the world who made you, and serve him and go in his ways, for it is he who delivered me from out of this fire. It is he who created the souls and the spirits of all men, and he formed man in his mother's womb and brought those who trust in him from all pain. The king released Abraham and gave him many gifts. to let him go without any further disturbances. For a little while, this story gets better, and I left many nuggets of the story. You could find the story in the book of Jasher. I can say I believe this is one of the reasons Nimrod started to build the Tower of Babel, which is not really spoken of in the Bible. But staying with our subject, from that day, I got lost here. From that day forward, Abraham inclined the hearts of the sons of man to serve the Lord. And we can see why Abraham was picked and favored for the position of patriarchy from the Lord. Now, the next 3 chapters that we are going to cover is from the book of the Apocalypse of Abraham. I would love to know who were these people that took out these books from our Bible. I would also want to know your comments on the subject. Does it make sense? Does it complete the story that was only briefly spoken about in the Bible? My biggest issue is that they hid the supernatural being of God all the time. And why is that? Always remember we are created in the image of our Father. This is the first of these commentaries, but I will be exposing more and asking your opinions. God's supernatural reality. God's supernatural reality. So in these chapters, you can this is the story that I got from the Apocalypse of Abraham. I'm not gonna make this video too long because I noticed that a lot of you do not stay to listen to all the video. So I'm basically gonna leave it there for those who are interested in the story. And this is what happened when God was telling Abraham that his how is it called, his progeny, of how he was going to become the patriarchy of all his descendants. And what's amazing here is that you have in chapter 18, you have the description of the throne of God, how it functions. Here you will see that the same creatures, or something similar to the same creatures that were described in the book of Ezekiel, were here carrying the throne of God. But here in this story, you're going to find that Abraham was taken up to heaven, and he describes the 7 firmaments, or the firmaments of the way the heavens are broken up. You're going to find what the way they're able to function with God. It's singing, and there's different rules and regulations. It's really interesting. You're going to find how God functions and how you have to direct him. And chapter 19, you're going to find what God truly in the way that God tells him about him being the patriarchy, and how he showed him, because he was up in heaven. If we look at the Bible in itself, the only one that supposedly went up to heaven in a vision was John, but he wasn't the only one. I actually found several of God's prophets that were able to go up to heaven and speak to God, and the way they interact with God was just amazing. Here it speaks about the type of spirits and what he was able to see in the different firmaments. I'm very curious to find out more of the living ones, and so I'm still doing research on that. Again, this is more of description of how heaven functions, the firmaments, and what happened while he was up there. Chapter 20, it speaks for itself. I am extremely curious to see for whoever got into this part of the video, what do you think about what God mentions and how he mentions of what he says? And there will be a second part to this, because this is going to leave the question of how God functions. And that's basically my whole point of this video, is for us to be more in tune to God's supernatural power and how he functions. And so therefore, when you look at this, how it ends is just very curious, but I don't want to go over my time on this video. So if you're that curious, just please leave any comments below, that I will keep doing the research and try to cut down my videos as short as possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, please click and share. And if you do really like the video and the teachings, just give me a heads up to let me know to keep doing these videos, because it's really important for the information that has been hidden from us to be put out there. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.